Welcome to the All Out Leadership Podcast, hosted by Pastor Eric Lawson, where each episode is uniquely designed to help you live all out by bringing you practical leadership from a biblical perspective delivered in 10 minutes or less. So whether you're a business leader, serving in ministry, or simply looking to grow in your leadership, this podcast is for you. Before we dive into this week's topic, make sure to subscribe to the podcast and download the show notes at ericlawson.com/podcast. And while you're at it, feel free to share the content on social media. Now, let's join Pastor Eric for this week's conversation.
Welcome to another edition of the All Out Leadership Podcast. We are in this season in the life of David where he's encountering a lot of pain. And what we're going to discover is a lot of this pain is self-inflicted. You might know the name Absalom. A lot of times people even, reference that inside of the church context. Hey, don't be an Absalom, or that guy's got an Absalom spirit. And Absalom was someone who rebelled against the king. It was actually David's son, but he rebelled against the king, caused a split, caused a division. And so inside of the church world, a lot of times, we just talk about the Absalom spirit. Many pastors, unfortunately, have experienced the pain of a church split or multiple church splits. And often there's an Absalom that's kind of spearheading that and championing that division to take place. And what we see is David actually created Absalom. Now, the sin was latent within Absalom. These traits were already there, but David did some things that actually created this or caused it to grow. And it comes down to this thing called confrontation. David actually did not confront certain things inside of Absalom, inside of this sphere, and it actually caused this rebellious spirit to manifest. And we're going to look at 4 moments David should have confronted, but he didn't. Now, the first one we looked at was when Amnon raped Absalom's sister, Tamar. David is not seen as confronting that situation, confronting Amnon. And so what we see is for 2 years, there's silence over this situation, and Absalom is stewing over this. Now, had David stepped in and done what he should have done as a father, what he should have done as an authority figure, and brought justice, dealt with that in a way that was right, then it would have helped Absalom with that desire for justice. A desire for justice is not a wrong feeling. It's part of a human trait that we have because we serve a just God. It's how that justice is executed determines whether or not it's right or wrong. And so Absalom took justice into his own hands, and that was the wrong way to do it. So we see after Absalom kills Amnon and brings about revenge, he flees. So we go to 2 Samuel 13, verse 38. So Absalom fled and went to Gashur, and he was there for 3 years. Now, this city was about 80 miles north of Jerusalem, and he actually went to his grandparents' house. You can find that lineage there in 2 Samuel chapter 3, verse 3. So he goes back to grandma and grandpa's house, and there for 3 years, David is absent. David is not dealing with the situation. He doesn't confront that now he just had Absalom murder a brother. That should have been justice. That should have been a confrontation, and David did not deal with that. So what's taking place during this 3 years? There's more festering. There's more bitterness. There's more resentment growing inside of Absalom. Well, David is really tricked by Joab to bring Absalom back to Jerusalem, and so we're going to pick up there. 2 Samuel 14, verse 24, and the king said, "Let him return to his own house, but don't let him see my face." So Absalom returned to his own house and did not see the king's face. Now, 2 years, he's basically under house arrest. So now what we have is for 5 years, there has been nothing done by David to deal with the sin of Absalom murdering his brother. So he didn't deal with Amnon, he didn't deal with Absalom, and now there's 7 years where David was basically absent as a father, not confronting, not correcting, not coaching, not disciplining Absalom. And because of this, it's actually creating this monster that we're going to see. So then we see 2 Samuel 14, verse 28, and Absalom dwelt 2 full years in Jerusalem, but did not see the king's face. Well, he tricks Absalom, into helping him get his dad to actually let him see him. And so now we jump into chapter 14, verse 33, where they actually finally meet, David and Absalom. So Joab went to the king and told him, and when he had called for Absalom, and he came to the king and bowed himself on his face to the ground before the king, then the king kissed Absalom. That's it. That's all you got. There is no discipline. There's no confrontation. There's not, hey, maybe we need to talk about what you did back here. Oh, hey, by the way, there's probably some consequences. Absolutely nothing. Then what happens after this? The house arrest is lifted, and Absalom's free to kind of just wander around the city. And so 7 years of this void of correction creates this monster called Absalom. And we're going to see what Absalom does. We're going to see the pattern of rebellion. We're going to see signs, character points, character traits to look for. But in essence, David created this. What David gave was kindness when what Absalom needed was correction. Now, Solomon wrote this particular proverb we're going to read. And I wonder if Solomon didn't write this from having observed this lack inside of his father's life as a disciplinarian. Proverbs 13, verse 24, he who spares the rod hates his son, but he who loves him disciplines him promptly. And I think that's a key word, prompt discipline. The longer we allow a gap, whether you're confronting a staff member, someone a friend, a child, or talking with a spouse even about something that's causing issues, the longer we allow that to go unaddressed, it's a space where Satan can work. Satan works in the gap. Satan speaks in silence. Satan speaks into that void. And that's why the Bible talks about, see to it that there's no root of bitterness that grows up and causes defilement. So there's a speed that needs to be brought into the right confrontation moments. I have a pastor mentor who built a very, very large church, pastored for more than 30 years, and has since retired and just investing in other pastors. And he never had a church split. Grew a church to over 10,000 people, never had a church split. And that's pretty significant inside of the church world. And here's what he would teach. He would say this: I created church splinters, so I never had church splits. Meaning he would confront situations when they were small, knowing not every situation is going to be reconcilable, knowing that sometimes somebody's going to get mad, somebody's going to leave the church, that staff person's going to quit. And he goes, I was okay with people leaving one or two here at a time if they weren't going to adjust their heart, if they weren't going to get it right. Because if I didn't deal with those when they were small, birds of a feather flock together, and disgruntled people are always attracted to other disgruntled people. They find each other. And I don't know if it's like a website, disgruntledpeople.com. I don't know, but they just seem to find each other. And actually, you're going to see this in how Absalom harnessed disgruntled people to create the split. But anyway, so he goes, I just never allowed them to stick around long enough that they could, create a big split because I just sent them out with splinters. And I go, that's a really brilliant strategy. Now, the goal wasn't to get rid of people or offend people. The goal of confrontation was reconciliation. The goal of confrontation is, hey, I care about us. I want to help us. I want to see us push through this. But we can't control how people respond. We can't control the outcome, but we do need to take care of our part, and that is to be proactive, to go, hey, there's a problem here. Hey, I'm concerned about this. Hey, let's talk about that. Now, if confrontation is such an important part of relationship, of community, then why don't more people do it? And why won't more people do it correctly? That's what we're going to be looking at in the next podcast coming up. We're going to address why do people avoid conflict, and then we're going to talk about two practical ways to bring about healthy resolution in conflict. See you in the upcoming podcasts.
Thank you for joining us on the All Out Leadership Podcast. We hope you gained new biblical insight that challenged you to grow in your leadership. If you've enjoyed this week's episode, we would love your help in getting the content out farther. You can help by subscribing to the podcast at ericlawson.com/podcast and telling others about it. Next week, Pastor Eric will be back with another episode. So until then, we hope you have a great week being an all-out leader.